Brazil's death toll continues to mount. Latin America's largest country confirmed nearly 16,000 cases of coronavirus infection as of Wednesday, with deaths rising by 133 to 800 in a 24-hour period. The southeastern state of Sao Paulo, its most populous and the hardest hit by the pandemic so far, has decided to extend lockdown measures until April the 22nd. Faced with soaring numbers and a shortage of medical supplies, the country is stumbling politically too. Its recent diplomatic spat with China has some worrying about bilateral relations. So what efforts is Beijing making to help Brazil with the pandemic? Is South America's largest country likely to get control of the problem anytime soon? I'm pleased to be joined by Professor Haibin, Deputy Director of the Institute of Foreign Policy Studies at the Shanghai Institutes for International Studies, and from Sao Paulo by Vinicius de Freitas, visiting professor at the China Foreign Affairs University and senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. So a bit of a background to what we're talking about. Chinese Ambassador Yang Wanming tweeted just hours ago saying, in a telephone conversation with the president of the Chamber of Deputies of Brazil, Rodrigo Maia, I conveyed the compliments of the Chinese leaders. We emphasized the importance of bilateral relations as well as the need and relevance of bilateral cooperation in tackling COVID-19. Another tweet from China's embassy to Brazil on Tuesday shows specialists and staff at one of the field hospitals that were built in Wuhan, sharing their experience with representatives of the Brazilian Ministry of Health and doctors in 12 states. And then on April the 1st, Emirates Airline tweeted that Emirates Sky Cargo has just flown 500,000 COVID-19 test kits to Sao Paulo on first of the two special charters carrying medical supplies from China to Brazil, and there are more reports on aid and assistance from China to Brazil, be it sharing supplies or experience. So, Professor Neil, what do you think of the actions taken by China? To what extent is it helping Brazil, and why is China actively sharing its expertise and resources?
I think Brazil is the latest case to show how China cooperates with the rest of the world to deal with the spreading of the COVID-19. So Brazil and China has developed a very good relationship in the past 2 decades, and especially on the fighting the virus, China has invited the Brazilian counterparts to take part in the China-Latin America dialogue on this, how to deal with this issue, sharing the scientific data and treatment, and also in the recent G20 summit, I think both leaders have made their commitments to invite international cooperation to deal with this issue. I think China's epidemic experiences, achievements, and medical supplies have made undeniable contribution to the international collective action. So it is quite difficult to imagine how difficult the international epidemic will be if China failed to do so. So as we know, many developed countries are very reluctant to export medical supplies to neighboring countries at this difficult moment, such as the U.S. has asked its 3M company to stop exporting these medical supplies to Canada and Latin American countries. So China's commitment to the international cooperation is very important, especially for the developing countries, including Brazil. Also, many countries, including Brazil, are abandoning their stereotypes and adopting China's proven practices, such as conducting the largest scale testing, set up field hospitals in Sao Paulo, for example, wearing masks and home quarantine. So Brazil benefited a lot from China's experiences and cooperation.
Yeah, Professor de Freitas, what has been the perception, however, of Chinese cooperation, Chinese assistance? We have heard definitely some unpleasant, unfriendly comments, noises, either blaming China or criticizing China. What do you think is the general perception of relations with China at this moment?
I think that for the last 10 years, China has been Brazil's largest trading partner and one of Brazil's largest investors. Now, what we see is that because of the election cycle, we have a new president, and the group that came into power has some kind of proximity with the United States. And what you see sometimes is that since the U.S. is bashing China all over the world and criticism going on, some of these people that are serving in government, very reduced amount of people, I should say, they have been using the rhetoric of these conspiracy theories involving China, and it's totally wrong. And I think that the overall perception in that sense is that now is not the moment to criticize China. Now is actually the moment to copy many of the measures that China implemented to get out of the situation and improve the situation in Wuhan, and also how China managed the whole thing in a large country as China. Now, I think the Brazilians should learn in that sense how to improve and to benefit from the Chinese experience, not only with the way the crisis was treated, like with the epidemics was treated, but also the day after. We should look into how the Chinese are going to handle the economic recovery in many of these areas so that we can actually learn and improve the relationship. So I think we hear some voices here and there. They do not represent the view perspective of the Brazilian relationship with China. And I think, these people will eventually go away and realize that the relationship is much more than this, what they're saying.
Hopefully, because, of course, bad news travel faster, and bad feelings also travel much faster, especially on social media. When we hear some of these images, some of these tweets, they spread and they do hurt people, especially on the Chinese social media. Although some of these remarks have been retracted, have been corrected, yet the impact has already been there. So, Professor Niu, how should people in China look at such comments? I mean, not everybody is aware of the context, the political and economic social context of such comments. So what can be done on the side of the Chinese people to understand the big picture of bilateral ties and remain supportive of the government's action to assist Brazil in its fight against COVID-19?
Yes, I think it is very important for the Chinese public to know the big picture of the China-Brazil relationship. I believe the majority of the Brazilian government at the federal level and the state level, they prefer a good relationship, cooperation with China. So I think the unfounded stigma on conspiracy theory on Twitter by some senior Brazilian officials just represents a very small group of the Brazilian government. So I think we should maintain very clear perception of the importance of the strategic partnership between China and Brazil. I believe this COVID-19 crisis will be a testing point for the friendship between China and Brazil.
Indeed, at times like this, cooler heads must prevail. Domestically, Professor de Freitas, Brazil has been spending a lot of time discussing politics, especially whether its health minister should stay or go. Reports say that President Bolsonaro is losing support due to attempts to minimize the gravity of the pandemic and shocking public health experts by arguing for a relaxation of state lockdowns. We discussed this a little bit last time. So there is a bit of a health minister clashing with the president over what to do, what not to do. How is the situation, how has the situation evolved since we last talked? How is this distraction affecting Brazil's handling of the pandemic? I
think the situation that we have is that the problem with COVID-19 is that it has been transformed into a political matter related to the elections that we're going to have in 2022. And this political element has distorted the perspective on how to deal with the country and how to treat the situation. So you have governors on one way thinking that the strategy should follow what the World Health Organization is saying, and on the other hand, you have the president that is affirming that we should have other policies considering the economic impact of the situation. Now, the problem is that what they're selling, and this is the issue, is that they are telling us that either, healthcare, public health, or the economy. And I think that this is a mistake in that sense that we have observed in the authorities. Now, one thing that I should add also is that this is also a temporary thing. Governments come and go, and the relationship between Brazil and China is much bigger than this situation now. But what we see is that the political element is what's really blinding the people to understand that COVID-19 is a healthcare issue that should be treated like a healthcare situation, and the politics at this time should be taken aside so that people can actually get back to work, get their situation, the previous situation, that they go back and do things that they were doing, so that we actually have a better country after the crisis. The problem is this: we are confusing and we are anticipating the presidential election of 2022, and this is the greatest mistake that Brazil is making right now.
So at this moment, are you saying that the government is making the right, or the focus, at least, is clearer as to what to do? Because the debate between the economy and saving lives, you say now the focus must be saving lives, and yet is the right kind of policy in place, or are things going to get much worse before it starts to get better? Professor de Freitas.
I think that the president, a few days ago, they were talking about that he was going to fire the Minister of Health. But what we have seen is that good sense at least has prevailed a little. Now we see that the government is divided between those that we call the ideologues, the ones that want to blame everyone for their fault, and they want to blame China, and they want to make these stupid comments sometimes. And on the other hand, you do have people that have a lot of sense, and they realize, okay, we have to do some measures that are going to comply with the things that the world is doing, and not trying to find another solution that is not really going to solve the problem as fast as we can.
All right, we have to leave it there.
And I've noticed that China has been extremely good in handling this situation.
We have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Professor de Freitas, joining us from Sao Paulo, and Mr. Haibin joining us from Shanghai.